The metal walls of the Vorthan battlecruiser groaned as it moved through space filled with broken ships and dead bodies. Admiral Kuncho stood at the front window of his ship, looking out at what used to be the mighty fleet of the Telek Republic. Now it was just floating pieces of metal and glass, spinning slowly in the cold darkness between stars. His face was old and marked by years of fighting. The light from distant suns made the deep lines around his eyes look even deeper. 3 months ago, the last free world in the Outer Rim had been destroyed. The brave soldiers who tried to defend it were now scattered across space like dust. In the wind, sir, called Lieutenant Jinwoo from his desk, full of blinking lights and screens. His voice was tired and sad. We are getting help calls from the Kepler mining colonies. The hegemony has started their final attack. Kyung-ho's mouth became a hard line. 47 years of war. And this was how it was ending. Not with a brave final battle, but with the complete killing of every species that had dared to dream of being free. The hegemony ships were like living machines, with pilots whose brains were connected directly to their weapons. They felt no fear, and their guns could break entire planets apart. Have we heard anything from the other survivor fleets? Kyung-ho asked. Nothing, sir. All communication has been cut off across 17 sectors. We are ... We are the last ones left. Down in the ship's eating area, scared people from different worlds sat close together around small glowing screens. They watched their children play games that looked like the same battles that had killed their parents. The children laughed and pretended to fight, not understanding that the real war had taken everything from them. Dr. Hyjin sat among them, holding tight to a small computer tablet. She used to be the Republic's top scientist who studied alien life forms. Now, she was just another refugee. But her tablet held something precious. The last genetic samples of 12 different species that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Tell me the story again, whispered young Sunho. Was a Telek child, whose blue skin used to glow with natural light. But now it was dull and dark, because he did not have enough food. Hyjin looked at the boy with sad eyes. Which story do you want to hear? The one about Earth? The warrior planet? The adults around them looked at each other with knowing glances. Earth was like a fairy tale to them now, a mythical world that was supposed to exist somewhere in the forgotten parts of the galaxy. The old stories talked about a species called humans who were supposed to be the greatest warriors ever known. They were said to fight like artists, turning war into something beautiful and terrible. Most people thought these stories were just made-up tales that desperate people told themselves to feel better. Long ago, Hyjin began, her voice soft and gentle. When the stars were young and the hegemony was just a whisper in the empty space, there lived a species that never learned the word surrender. They came from a blue and green world called Earth, and they were different from all other thinking beings in the galaxy. The children gathered closer, their eyes wide with wonder. Even the adults leaned in to listen, hungry for any story that might give them hope. These humans, Hyjin continued, did not have the strongest bodies or the smartest minds. Had something that made them special? They never gave up. When faced with enemies stronger than them, they found new ways to fight. When their weapons broke, they made new ones from whatever they could find. When their cities were destroyed, they kept fighting from the ruins. Sunho's dull blue skin seemed to flicker with just a tiny bit of light. Were they real? The old records say they were, Hyjin said. But that was so long ago, before this hegemony grew strong. No one knows if they still exist. Up on the bridge, Kyung-ho received the final message from High Command. The words appeared on his screen in cold blue letters. Core worlds have fallen. Hegemony victory is complete. This is our last transmission. May the stars remember us. Closed his eyes and felt the weight of failure crushing down on him. All the battles, all the deaths, all the brave sacrifices, it had all been for nothing. The hegemony had won. And freedom was now just a word that children would never learn, as he watched the last free ship signal disappear from his screens. Kyung-ho found himself thinking about the old stories. Somewhere out there in the vast darkness of space were the legendary warriors of Earth still alive. And if they were real, would they ever know that the galaxy had died while calling their name? The ship drifted on through the graveyard of broken dreams, carrying the last free souls toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the stars seemed dimmer, as if the light of hope itself was slowly going out. Captain Taman stared at the glowing screens in front of him, his metal-enhanced eyes trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The star system they called Target 7739 should have been easy to conquer. His fleet was massive and powerful. The enemy had only a few small ships and one planet. It should have taken just one day to win. Instead, they had been fighting for 3 months, and his forces were losing. "Tell me what happened," he said to his officers. His voice was strange and deep because machines had changed his throat too, make him sound more frightening. Sub-Commander Hyung looked scared as she read from her reports. Wires and metal pieces were attached to her head, connecting her brain directly to the ship's computers. "We lost another group of our big ships. The enemy is using normal cargo ships and turning them into weapons. They put missiles on ships that used to carry food and supplies. The enemy called themselves humans, and they were unlike anything the hegemony had ever fought before. When the hegemony's huge ships appeared in their sky, the humans did not surrender like other species. Always did. Instead, they started fighting in ways that made no sense. They changed their fighting methods so fast that the hegemony's war computers could not keep up. What bothered Taman most was that these humans seemed to think war was like a game or puzzle to solve. Other species fought because they had to. Humans fought because they wanted to figure out how to win." Down on the planet's surface, Sergeant Changmin walked carefully through the broken streets of what used to be the humans' biggest city. The buildings were empty and damaged, but the humans had not left without a plan. They had turned every street corner into a trap. Changmin's metal boots stepped on what looked like normal ground, but sensors hidden underneath made alarms go off in buildings far away. This confused his soldiers and made them waste time checking empty buildings. Strange pulses of electricity would suddenly shut down their weapons and communication devices. Even worse, the humans had changed the city's water system so that acid would flood important areas when Changmin's troops tried to set up their equipment. "These humans are not fighting like any other species we have conquered." Changmin spoke into his communication device. "They think many steps ahead of us. They use our own strength against us." Far below the ruined city, in tunnels and bunkers dug deep into the ground, the human resistance leader Dong Hyan sat at a table covered with papers and small computers. Around him, other humans in military uniforms studied maps and reports. Unlike other species in the galaxy, humans had spent thousands of years fighting wars against each other on their own planet. This experience was now helping them fight the hegemony. "The hegemony fights like a big machine," Dong Hyan explained to his officers. "They always do the same things in the same order. They use big ships and powerful weapons to scare their enemies. They think fear will make us give up. But machines can be broken if you understand how they work." Major Sujin, his second in command, looked worried as she read from her own reports. "Our secret watching stations in space are seeing huge enemy fleets moving toward us. They are bringing many more ships to fight us." Instead of looking scared, Dong Hyan smiled in a way that was cold and dangerous. "Good. Let them bring all their ships here. The more soldiers they send to fight us, the fewer they have to control other worlds in the galaxy." High above the planet, small robot satellites quietly sent messages across the galaxy. The signals were weak and hard to detect, but they carried important words to anyone who might be listening. "Earth fights. Earth endures. Earth does not yield." These messages traveled through space for weeks and months, reaching the darkest corners of the galaxy, where the survivors of conquered worlds were hiding. On broken ships and secret bases, aliens who had given up all hope began to hear something impossible. There was a world that was still fighting the hegemony, on a damaged space station in the Outer Rim. An old telecommander named Velter heard the signal through his ship's communication system. His blue skin, which had been dull with despair, began to glow faintly with excitement. For the first time in years, he felt something he had forgotten existed. Hope. Could it be real? He whispered to himself. Could the old stories about the warrior planet be true? Similar scenes played out across the galaxy, in hidden refugee camps, in broken cities on conquered worlds, in the secret meeting places of resistance groups. The message spread like wildfire. Earth was fighting. The humans were real. Someone was still standing up to the hegemony, The hegemony had conquered the galaxy by making every species believe that resistance was impossible. But now, for the first time in centuries, that belief was beginning to crack. The humans had done something that no other species had managed. They had shown that the hegemony could be hurt in the depths of space. The survivors of a dozen dead civilizations began to stir, like sleepers waking from a long and terrible dream. The secret message arrived on the refugee ship last dawn like a whisper from a dream. Admiral Kyung-ho sat in his command chair, looking even older and more tired than before. His hair had turned completely white, and new lines marked his face. Like a map of all the battles he had lost, the message was short and written in the Old Republic's secret code. Sol 3 active. Terran resistance confirmed. Hegemony forces engaged, heavy casualties reported. Lieutenant Jin Woo read the message aloud, and his voice shook with something that had been missing for months: hope. Sir, we are getting similar reports from 17 different areas of space. Something big is happening in the outer spiral. Then Dr. Hyjin ran onto the bridge, her face bright with excitement. She was usually calm and quiet, but now she looked like she might explode with joy. The genetic databases. I have been studying the transmission signals. The lifeform patterns match exactly what the ancient texts described. They are real. The humans are real. All across the galaxy, the same amazing scenes were happening on refugee ships and secret bases. The Valkyrie survivors hiding in the Horsehead. Nebula heard the news. The last members of the Crystalline Collective got the message. The scattered telecolonies received the same impossible information. Earth, the mythical warrior world from old stories, was not just real but was actually fighting the hegemony right now. On the conquered world of Thalos Prime, a slave worker named Wu Jin felt his heart beating fast as he quietly told the news. To his work group, used to be an engineer for the Republic, but now he was forced to work in the hegemony's factories. For the first time in years, the constant fear in his chest was replaced by something else, the desire to fight back. How do we know this is true? Asked his friend Ji-hun. Ji-hun used to be a pilot, but the hegemony had cut off his wings with surgery so he could never try to escape. Because Wu Jin said, his voice getting stronger and more confident. For the first time in many years, the hegemony has sent more soldiers to guard us. They are scared. It was true. All across the galaxy, hegemony commanders were moving there. Troops around in ways they had never done before. Ships that usually stayed in one place to keep conquered worlds under control were now being sent to fight at Earth, deep in his underground command bunker. Human resistance leader Dong Han watched. Screens that showed hegemony fleet movements across many sectors of space. His helper, Captain the Gi, brought him the latest intelligence reports. Sir, we can see that they are moving massive numbers of troops. They are taking forces away from keeping other worlds under control and sending them here to fight us. Dong Han smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the cold smile of someone who had planned for this moment. This is exactly what we hoped would happen. Send the signal to all our secret groups. Start Phase 2 of the Liberation Protocol, sir. Daji looked confused. We do not have a Phase 2. We do now, Dong Han said. I send a message to every refugee ship, every hidden base, every survivor, who still remembers what freedom feels like. Tell them Earth stands strong and we are not standing alone. The message went out through hidden communication networks and forgotten relay stations. Within hours, the first coordinated resistance attacks began happening all across the galaxy. On Vorthan Prime, secret saboteurs destroyed 3 orbital factories that made weapons for the hegemony. Mining operations across the hegemony's industrial sectors stopped completely as workers simply refused to work. Small attacks erupted on dozens of worlds at exactly the same time. On the mining world of Kepler 7, workers who had been slaves for 20 years suddenly stood up from their machines and walked away. The hegemony guards did not know what to do. They were used to controlling people through fear. But the workers were no longer afraid. On the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, alien scientists who had been forced to work on hegemony weapons suddenly began sabotaging their own projects. Computer viruses spread through the station's systems, destroying years of research in the asteroid belt of the Vega system. Hidden rebel groups that had been quiet for decades suddenly attacked hegemony supply ships. The attacks were small, but happened everywhere at once, like 1,000 tiny fires starting across the galaxy, for the first time in living memory. The hegemony found itself having to react to what others were doing instead of controlling everything. The galaxy's conquered species, inspired by humanity's refusal to give up, began to remember what it meant to fight. Admiral Kunho stood on the bridge of his refugee ship, watching reports come in from across the galaxy. Each report told of another small victory, another act of defiance, another spark of rebellion. They did it, he whispered to Dr. Hygen. The humans actually did it. They reminded us all how to fight. Dr. Hygen nodded, tears of joy running down her face. The old stories were true. Earth really is the warrior planet. And now the whole galaxy is waking up. A spark had been lit. After centuries of darkness, the galaxy was beginning to burn with the light of rebellion. The hegemony's central command was filled with panic and confusion. Lights flashed red on every screen, and alarm sounds echoed through the metal corridors. Strategic Overlord Keth 7, a creature that was half machine and half living tissue, stood in the center of the command room, trying to understand what was happening. What had started as a small fight on one planet had grown into something the hegemony had never seen before, a rebellion that included hundreds of different species across the entire galaxy. "Give me a report," Keth 7 commanded. Its voice was cold and mechanical, but there was something new in it. "Worry." Commander Next 9, another biomechanical creature, looked at the data streaming across multiple screens. Its voice shook as it spoke, even though machines had been installed in its throat to remove fear. "Sir, we have fighting on 437 worlds. Our control forces are spread too thin. We cannot maintain order." The numbers were frightening. The Telic survivors had turned on their old defense systems in the Outer Rim, systems that had been sleeping for decades. The Valkyrie had come out of their secret hiding places to attack supply ships. Even the peaceful crustacean collective, who had never hurt anyone, were now using their mind powers to help coordinate attacks across impossible distances. At the center of all this chaos were the humans, the species that had somehow taught the entire galaxy how to fight again. Commander Taman, who was now in charge of attacking the Sol system where Earth was located, found himself fighting an enemy unlike anything he had ever faced. The humans had turned their entire star system into one giant weapon. Human ships would suddenly appear from asteroid fields where they had been hiding. They launched attacks from secret bases on moons. They struck from the shadows of gas giant planets. Every time Taman thought he had them trapped, they would slip away and attack from somewhere else. "They are not just fighting us," he reported to his commanders. "They are teaching other species how to fight us. All our war strategies are useless now. Every standard attack method has been figured out and defeated." On Earth's surface, in his underground command center, Resistance leader Dong Hyen was not just controlling his own forces. He was helping liberation movements across the entire galaxy. His communication officer, Major Sujin, worked with data, streams from dozens of different species, translating human fighting methods into forms that alien minds could understand. The Telic fleet reports successful attacks on the hegemony's fuel storage facilities in Sector 7, she announced, reading from multiple screens at once. The Valkyrie have destroyed 3 orbital weapon platforms and the crustaceans. They are actually smiling. I did not know they could smile. Dong Hyen nodded as he studied the huge galactic display map in front of him. Red dots showed hegemony strongholds, but they were increasingly surrounded by green zones, liberated worlds, where the rebellion had taken control. "Send a message." To Admiral Kuncho, he ordered, "Tell him it is time for the combined fleet operation." Deep in the darkness of space, the largest fleet that had been assembled in 1,000 years began to move. Ships from a dozen different species, all working together under human command, moved toward targets throughout hegemony space. The sleek, fast ships of the Telic Republic flew next to the beautiful crystalline ships of the collective. Human destroyers provided coordination and fire support for everyone. Admiral Kung Ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the fleet's formation with tears running down his old face. Next to him, Dr. Haijin monitored the biological readings from the crew. The stress indicators that had troubled them for years were finally gone. "How did they do it?" she whispered in amazement. "How did the humans teach us to hope again?" "They did not teach us to hope," Kyun-ho replied, his voice filled with emotion. "They taught us to fight. Hope was just what happened because of that." The combined fleet struck 17 hegemony strongholds at exactly the same time. Across the galaxy, battles erupted as the rebellion showed its true strength. Ships moved like dancing lights, their advanced technology finally being used for freedom instead of just survival. The Valkyrie used their knowledge of hegemony supply routes to cut off enemy reinforcements. The crustaceans used their psychic abilities to coordinate attacks across vast distances, allowing perfect timing. On the conquered world of Thalos Prime, Wu Jin and his fellow workers watched through hidden screens as liberation fleets appeared in their sky. For the first time in decades, they saw hegemony ships running away instead of attacking. "It is really happening," Jia Han whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "We are actually winning." On refugee ships across the galaxy, families who had been running and hiding for years suddenly had something they had almost forgotten. A reason to believe in tomorrow. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's stars burned with the light of liberation. The hegemony, which had seemed invincible for so long, was finally being challenged by an enemy it could not understand: hope itself. Spread from species to species like wildfire, the war was spreading, and for the first time in living memory, it was the forces of freedom that were winning. The final battle began like a storm across 3 star systems at once, filling the darkness of space with explosions of fire and metal. The hegemony's most important worlds, which had been safe for thousands of years, suddenly found themselves under attack by a group of species working together in ways the hegemony had never seen before. Admiral Kyun-ho stood on the bridge of the New Republic, a massive command ship that was humanity's gift to the galaxy. The ship was so big it could coordinate the attacks of dozens of different species at the same time. Next to him, human tactical advisor, Colonel Minsu watched the chaos of battle and turned it into information that everyone could understand. "Telok forces have broken through the outer defenses of Hegemony Prime," Minsu reported, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what was happening. "Crustacean psychic networks are confusing their command structure. Akari strike teams have destroyed their orbital weapons platforms." The human fleet, led by Admiral Donghain, attacked the heart of the hegemony's military power. Their ships moved like hunting animals, finding weaknesses that other species had never noticed. Every battle showed the basic truth that had started the rebellion. Humans did not just fight wars, they understood them completely. On the surface of Hegemony Prime, the Empire's central world, human special forces led by Captain Naji worked. Together with freed slaves in a final attack on the command citadel, the huge building had been built to scare conquered species. But now it became a symbol of fighting back as former victims climbed its walls, alongside their human liberators. The citadel was enormous, made of black metal that stretched up toward the sky like a mountain. For 1,000 years, it had been the symbol of hegemony power. Now, small figures could be seen climbing its walls, humans and aliens working together to tear down the symbol of their oppression. "All units, this is Yag Alpha," she transmitted through her communication device. "The citadel is ours. Pete, Hegemony Command has fallen." Strategic Overlord Keth-7, the Hegemony's supreme commander, found itself trapped in its own command center as the building collapsed around it. Through the smoke and destruction, it watched human soldiers advancing with a sense of purpose that its species had never possessed. How it transmitted to the approaching humans, its mechanical voice, filled with confusion. "How did you defeat us?" Sergeant Chungman, now bearing the scars of 3 years of continuous warfare, looked at the biomechanical creature without hatred, only grim satisfaction. His face was marked by battles, but his eyes were clear and determined. "We did not defeat you," he replied simply. "We taught everyone else how to defeat you." Across the galaxy, the news spread as fast as light itself could travel. Hegemony Prime had fallen. The orbital shipyards of Vorthan Secundus lay in ruins. The slave manufacturing worlds of the Rim had been liberated. 1,000 years of oppression had ended in a cascade of liberation that lit the stars like a festival of freedom. On every world, the same scenes played out. Prison camps opened their gates as guards fled. Slave workers stood up from their machines and walked into the sunlight as free beings. Children who had never known anything but fear began to laugh and play. Dr. Hygen, now serving as the Coalition's chief scientific advisor, monitored the biological readings of representatives from 47 species as they gathered on the reclaimed world of Talos Prime. The stress markers that had defined galactic civilization for centuries were gone, replaced by something she had only read about in ancient texts: contentment. The gathering was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beings from dozens of worlds, all different shapes and sizes and colors, stood together in the same room. Some had scales, some had fur, some were made of crystal, some floated in the air. But they all shared the same expression: hope. The humans saved us, observed Jiahan, his wings restored and gleaming in the light of Thelus's twin suns. The surgical scars where the hegemony had removed his wings were barely visible now, covered by new feathers that caught the light like jewels. No, corrected his friend Wu Jin, now serving as an engineer aboard a joint species exploration vessel. They reminded us how to save ourselves. From Earth, now revealed as the tactical and spiritual heart of the free galaxy, humanity's leaders watched their former enemies' worlds burn with the light of their own liberation. The war was over. But the peace they had won was not empty. It was filled with the promise that tyranny would never again find the galaxy defenseless. In the command center on Earth, Dung Han stood before a huge display showing the entire galaxy, where once there had been only red markers indicating hegemony control. Now there were green lights everywhere: free worlds, liberated peoples, hope restored. "We did it," whispered one of his officers. "No," Dung Han replied, echoing Wu Jin's words. "We simply reminded them that they could do it themselves." Hope had been dead for 1,000 years. But Earth had lit the stars with war, and in that fire, the galaxy had found its soul again. The age of oppression was over. The age of freedom had begun.